am. I'm so excited to be here. My dad, like I said, my dad asked me to do this too, and he really is. He's so excited about being back next week. I'm excited for y'all to get to hear that because I don't get to hear him nearly as often as I used to, and I love his words. So make sure you come back next weekend so that you can hear what he has to say. But I'm excited about this weekend. I'm excited to be able to share a little bit with you guys. It's been a while since I was in Conway. We've been in Greenbrier a lot, and I love Greenbrier, but Conway, this is where I grew up. I went to high school here, and I grew up going to church here, and so this is where it all started for me. And so to be back here this morning and sharing a word with you guys, we're going to get into that, but I kind of wanted to update y'all on my life a little bit because a little bit has changed. We've added another human into our family. This is a picture of Katie and our son, Jackson Richard Bezet, and I love that kid. We call him Jack. We had to call, his middle name had to be Richard because her dad and my dad's name are both Richard. It's just too easy to make them happy. And then there is another picture of Jack. He's the happiest little man. He's just like his mama. I love that woman. She is my baby mama. And I love her with my whole heart. Yesterday, this is the two of them serving. We had a serve day in Greenbrier, and we were putting together some stuff at one of our elementary schools, and there's Jack trying to get involved. I'm not sure how much he was actually helping, but he tried. I love being a dad. It's probably evident. He spit up on me right before church started this service. And I love being a dad. I love all of that. But I love being a pastor, and I'm so excited to be here. And I'm reminded every time I see those pictures of right when we found out that we were going to be parents, Katie and I. And everybody knows that my dad is hilarious, and he really is. But my dad, he had to get it from somebody. It didn't just come out of nowhere. And the person that my dad got it from was actually his dad, my papa. Now, my papa is also one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. The problem with my papa is that after about 10 minutes of him telling jokes, you can no longer repeat any of the jokes that he's been telling you. But he called me, and right when we found out that we were going to be parents, and he said, Hunter, I got to know something. And I said, Papa, what's going on? Are you okay? He sounded a little frantic. He said, yeah, I got to know something. Are you and Katie, are y'all going to have a boy or are y'all going to have a girl? Papa, I don't know. It's going to be a while before we even know that. Why do you need to know so bad? He said, because I got to know if I'm going to be a grandpa or a grandma. That's my papa, man. And I think back to before we found out if we were going to have a boy or a girl and how badly I wanted a boy. I wanted one so bad, and at first I was kind of timid about it, but the closer and closer we got, the more and more bold I became. I want a boy. And I remember we were in the ultrasound room, and we found out that it was going to be a boy, and I jumped up out of my chair, and I screamed, and I scared our poor little nurse, because I was so excited that it was going to be a boy. But I think back to that, and I think about how badly I wanted a boy because I thought that would be best for me, and how badly I wanted to control something that God was completely in control of. And I also think about how many times in our lives we try to do that same thing. Like we think that we know what's best for our life and what our purpose is supposed to be. So instead of asking God what he thinks we're supposed to do, we just go ahead and tell him what he needs to do in our lives. And how dangerous of a spot that can be. One of the things that I've learned and that I know over my short time here on this earth alive is this, that there is no purpose outside of God's purpose worth fighting for. There is only one purpose that can really change our lives and that can really set us up for success, and it's God's purpose for our lives. We know this from Proverbs chapter 19, verse 21, when it says, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. And I know that there's probably some people out here right now who you're looking up here and you're looking at this young kid up on stage and you're probably thinking to yourself, good for him. I'm glad he figured out what his purpose was at such a young age. And there's two things I want to say to that. One, there's not one day that goes by that I don't look back at the time where I finally figured out what my purpose was and wish it couldn't have been just a little bit sooner. Like I just wish if I would have just figured out a little bit sooner, maybe I could have saved just one more person for God. But there's also people in here who you're sitting here and you're looking and you're saying, well, that young kid, he's got this all figured out and he thinks that he knows what his purpose is. And my challenge to you would be, yeah, you're probably a lot older than me and you've probably lived a lot more life than me. But you're older than me and you still haven't figured out what your purpose from God is. And you still don't know what you're supposed to do here on this earth. And you're miserable. And you're faking and you're acting like you got it together. And you know on the inside that you have got to figure out what the next step is. And I'm asking you this morning to let me try to help you. Because what I have learned is that nothing can outstand the purposes of God. And as often as we might try to fight his purpose, he is always working on a plan, and it's about time that we started to listen. I learned this so vividly about 6 years ago now. I was further from God than I've ever been in my entire life. I was running. I didn't want to come to church. I didn't want to listen to my parents. I would disappear for days on end, and I wouldn't tell them or call them where I was, and I would just show back up. Finally, after giving me way more grace than I deserved, my dad called me on the phone one day and said, hey, Hunter, we've had enough of this. I no longer want you to be in our home, so when we get home today, I don't want you to be there anymore. I want you to move out. And it was one of those moments where when he said that, it hurt. It really hurt me, but I was too prideful to even admit it. So I just said, whatever, and I hung up the phone. But then I started thinking in my brain, I started thinking about man, I bet that was my dad's idea. I bet that wasn't my mom's idea. So I started walking around the house trying to think, what can I take from my house to make my mom miss me a lot? And I started walking and pacing through the house, and I came into my room, and all of a sudden I had this genius idea. It really was. I don't know where it came from. But I was going to take my mattress off of my bed. That's what I wanted to take. And what I thought in my brain was that every time my mom walked by the room, she'd look in there, she'd see the bed without the mattress, she'd think about me, she'd get mad, take it out on my dad, I win. Okay, like that was my thought process. So I called my friend and said, hey, buddy, I need you to come bring your trailer. We need to load up this mattress. And so we loaded up the mattress and we got in the car, and he looks at me and says, okay, where are we going? I don't know. I have no idea. This isn't going to fit on my friend's couch. I don't know what we're going to do with this mattress. And then I remembered, wait a second, I've got a friend who's got a barn in his backyard, and the barn's got a loft. And they don't ever go up in that loft, so I could probably sneak the mattress up in that loft. And if I ever really need a place to stay, I've always got my trusty barn loft, okay? And that's what happened. And I put the mattress up there, and then all of a sudden my life, it started taking one step after another, and it got worse and worse. And I lost my job, and people no longer wanted me sleeping on their couches. And I started sleeping on that mattress more and more. And one day I got a phone call from a buddy who needed me to do a job for him. And I had to run a part down south of Dallas, and he called me at 9 o'clock at night and asked me to do this. So I drove all night long, and I was coming back home about 9 or 10 o'clock the next morning, and I was on one of those old country roads that if you're a really talented driver like me, you can go faster than the speed limit. But there was a car in front of me that wasn't as talented, and they were driving way too slow. So I get up on their bumper, and we come around this corner, and there was one of those double yellow lines. It's more of a suggestion, not a law. And I passed them. And I'm in a big old dually truck. And when I passed them, it ticked them off. So they got right on my bumper. Well, I'm a bezet. You don't test a bezet. So I floored it, and I took off down this back road, and I'm swerving back and forth, and I'm losing this car little bit. Finally, I have about one more turn before I'm home free, should say barn free. And right before I make that turn, I look at my rearview mirror one more time, and on the rearview mirror of the car behind me, I see a little strip of blue lights. Yeah, we've all had that. And you have like that split second moment where you think about, should I run or should I not run? The answer is always no. It's always no. And I pulled over, and the cop came, and he got out of the car. He was so mad at me, and he said, get out of the truck. Your truck's gone. I'm towing it. Sit on the curb. I ain't sitting on the curb. And so I stood there, and he said, give me your driver's license. And I gave him my driver's license, and as soon as he looked at it, I knew he recognized my name. And he said, are you Rick Bezet's boy? Dadgummit. Yeah, I'm Rick Bezet, son. How I go to your dad's church. I want you to call him right now. Man, I haven't talked to my dad in months. I don't want to talk to him. And then I remembered, wait a second, my dad's out of the country. He's not even here. Sir, I'm sorry, I can't call my dad, thinking I got out of it. And then the officer said, yeah, okay, well, that's fine. Why don't you go ahead and call your mom instead? That's even worse, bro. I was so mad. I called my mom, the person that I thought still loved me a little bit. I said, Mom, I just got pulled over. Will you come pick me up? And she said yes, and she came and she picked me up, and she took me about the half a mile it was to get back to the barn. And then I realized when we're pulling up, man, now she's going to see where I'm actually living and how my life's really going. And I got even more ticked off. And right as we're pulling up, just before we stop, my mom looks over at me and she says something to me that ticked me off. She said, Hunter, I hope you know how much God loves you. And when she said that, I blew up. I was so mad. Are you kidding me? God loves me? Just lost all the money from this job on that tow. I don't have a place to live. I'm living in a barn. And you think that God loves me? How dare you say that to me? I got out of the car and I slammed the door in her face. I hurt my mom that day. Side note, if any of you in here have ever hurt your mom, make sure you apologize to her. There is no reason that we should ever hurt our mom. If there's anybody in our life that deserves our love and our respect, it is our mama. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I think about that all the time. But make sure you apologize to your mom. And I got out of the car, and what I didn't realize right then, but what I was about to realize is that I had settled living a life that I thought I wanted when the whole time I was completely miserable. And I was trying to fight, and I was trying to prove to everybody in my life that I could live it on my own, and that I didn't need God, and I didn't need my family, and I didn't need anybody's help to make it happen. And the whole time, I was nothing but miserable. And this is what I want you to know this morning, and that is that Jesus did not come and die and raise from the dead so that you and I can live average, mediocre lives with no purpose and with no meaning. No, he came and he died, and then he got up and he got out of the grave so that you and I can get up and get out of whatever we're going through as well. See, Jesus, he showed us the example, and we aren't supposed to live a mediocre life. Do you really think that he went all out for you so that you can barely make it through each week, going to work on Monday morning, and the only thing you can think about is when you get off on Friday afternoon, because that's when your real life gets to start? That is not how Jesus wants you to live. He's got a purpose for you to live right now, and he's ready to use you every minute of every single day. He wants us to be free, and he doesn't want us to be free of our own accord, but he wants to set us free. It says in Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Our God wants us to be free. He wants to set us up for success, but we've got to get out of our own way sometimes. So this is what we're going to do this morning. If you've got your Bibles, you can turn with me to Judges chapter 6. We're going to be reading about a Bible character that you may have heard of before. His name is Gideon. Gideon was a hero of the faith, no doubt about it. He was the man that took 300 soldiers and took on an army of tens of thousands and defeated them. And all of a sudden set Israel free from the oppression that it had been suffering for a long time. He accomplished more in his lifetime than most big dreamers could ever even dream about. He was a hero. But Gideon's life didn't start that way. In fact, Gideon started further away from God than most of you probably are. He started so far, he allowed his fear to dictate what he did in life. He had no courage, he had no passion, he had no purpose. And that's what we're going to talk about, and that's what we're going to learn from this morning. And we're going to look at how God's purpose gave Gideon true freedom in his life. Number one, if you're taking notes, God's plan is the key to unlocking freedom in your life. We got to know that God's plan is the key, not our own. And here's an obvious statement. When you're in a trap, your potential is trapped as well. In fact, when you're trapped, you might even feel like you don't have any potential at all. And some of you this morning, you need to hear that you have potential. God wants to use you for something. And instead of trying to figure out and fight for what your potential should be, you need to be paying attention to the trap that the devil's got you locked up in. But we're going to start right here in Judges chapter 6, verse 11. It says that the angel of the Lord, there it is. It says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down in the oak and Ophrah. Okay, I want to stop right here because right here in this verse where it says, the angel of the Lord, many scholars believe that this was not actually an angel. This was, in fact, Jesus. The reason they believe this is because later on in Judges, Gideon refers to this moment as it being the Lord, and even later on in the Bible, it refers to this moment as it being Jesus himself. And this is very important for us to understand for later on in my message. But the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak and Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abizrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Okay, so we're going to dissect this verse a little bit for learning's sake, because I don't know when the last time you were hanging out in a wine press was, but I have a feeling it wasn't recently. And I also have a feeling that not a lot of us know what threshing wheat is. So I'm going to explain this to you so you can kind of understand where Gideon really was in his life when Jesus shows up and talks to him. Katie and I had an opportunity to go to Israel just over a year ago and actually see one of these wine presses that the Bible is talking about here. And what a wine press was, it was a place where they put the grapes in this hole in the ground on bedrock so that they could squish them and get wine out of them and get the juice out of them. But the key here is that it had to be on bedrock. It had to be on a solid stone. So they had to dig down in the ground to get to the bedrock. It was a hole in the ground. And Gideon is threshing wheat down in one of these wine presses. And so he is doing this process where he's basically cleaning the wheat because when you harvest it, there is dust and there is dirt on it, and you can't eat it in that way. You either have to clean it so you can sell it for a higher price or clean it so you can eat it. And so the process of threshing wheat is you take a pitchfork and you throw the wheat up in the air. And when you throw the wheat up in the air, the dirt and the dust that is on it, wind comes by and it blows the dirt and the dust off. And when the wheat comes back down, it is clean. And so that is what Gideon is doing. But he's doing this process down in a wine press, in a hole in the ground. I don't know if you have ever been in a hole in the ground before, but there is not a whole lot of wind down there. That's the key ingredient to this process of threshing wheat. And so Gideon is caught up doing this task that is completely pointless and meaningless. And he's sitting there and he's throwing wheat and dirt up into the air, and then wheat and dirt are coming back down. And he's throwing wheat and dirt up in the air, and then wheat and dirt are coming back down. He's completely caught up in a meaningless and a pointless life. How many of us, even in this room, feel the exact same way? It is a dangerous place to be when you feel like you are caught up in a meaningless and a pointless life. Let me prove it to you. During World War II, the Nazis had a problem. They were capturing prisoners of war, POWs. And they were capturing these soldiers and they were taking them into their camps. And the problem with capturing soldiers is that they're trained to do one thing, and that is to fight. So when they were putting them into these camps, the soldiers were colluding and always trying to escape. And they were having to put down uprising after uprising. And they couldn't figure out how to get these soldiers to stop uprising. So this one guy came up with an ingenious plan, albeit for wrong reasons. And this is what he did. He went out one day and he got a huge pile of stones. And he brought them into this field and he put them down on one side of the field. And then he went into the barracks and he got all the prisoners out and he brought them to these stones. And he said, all right, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take these stones and I want you to put them on this side of the field. And when you're done, you can go to bed. So that's what they did all day long. They took the stones and they put it over on the other side of the field. And then the next morning, he goes back into the barracks and he goes and gets the prisoners. And he takes them back out to the field and he brings them over to the pile of rocks. He says, okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take those rocks and I want you to put them right back exactly where they were the day before. And so began this process of every single day, the prisoners waking up and moving this pile of rocks from one spot back to the exact same spot, and then from that spot back to the exact same spot. And before long, they no longer had a desire to escape. They no longer had a desire for freedom because they were caught up in a meaningless and pointless life. In fact, a lot of them began to go crazy and lose their minds because they didn't know what their purpose was anymore. How many of us can relate? How many people have spent their 20s and their 30s and their 40s and their 50s caught up in a life and feeling trapped in a hole in the ground because they're too afraid of what might happen if they actually got out of that hole? They're too afraid of what might happen if they actually did what God was calling them to do. They're afraid and they're letting that dictate their lives. They're caught up in a meaningless and pointless life. Do you really think that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords created you and custom designed you for that? So you can live a life like this? The answer is no. If you feel trapped, there's probably a good chance that you've disconnected from your godly purpose and you no longer know what that is. And if I could plead with everybody in this room, it would be to say this: don't waste your life. Don't settle for a life in a hole based on the fear of what might happen if you actually got out. If you are in a hole, it's probably because of fear and uncertainty, because that is exactly why Gideon was in this hole in the ground. But here is something really cool, and here's something really encouraging. In the next verse, in Judges chapter 6, verse 12, it goes on to say this: when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Think about this for a second. Think about how cool that is. God just showed up and is talking to a man in the ground who everybody walking by probably thought was a coward and had no potential in his life. And God is looking at him and calling him a mighty warrior. How cool is it that when God sees you, he doesn't see the hole that you're in. He sees the warrior that he created you to be. He sees what he has purposed you to be. And no matter how far you may feel like you are from him, and no matter how caught you may feel like you are, God, when he looks at you, he sees the warrior that you really are. And I dare you to ask God to allow yourself to see you the way that he sees you. Be ready. It's going to be a scary answer when it actually comes. But I dare you to ask God, God, just allow me to see myself the way that you see me. Because I promise you, he sees big things for your life. Number 2, you need to know that God's plan is bigger than your imagination. Judges chapter 6, verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Okay, this is another really cool moment. God shows up and he's talking to Gideon and he's telling him, "Hey, I need you to go ahead and climb out of that hole. But not only are you going to climb out of that hole, you are going to take on Midian. These people that have been oppressing your entire nation for years, you're going to take all of them on and I'm going to send you to do it." Think about how intimidating that moment must have been for Gideon. Here's what I know. Every time that God calls us to do something, not ourselves, but God calls us to do something, he will never call us into our comfort zone. He's never going to call us into a place that seems to make sense and that is comfortable for us and that we can just do on our own. No, he's going to call us into a place that is going to be kind of scary because we have to depend on him. And in fact, I'm sure that there are probably even people in this room right now who God has called you to do something. And you asked him one day, said, "God, I want you to show me what you have for my life and what your plan is for my life." And he told you. But it was so big and it was so scary, you just kept on praying. And he's given you your answer. It's time for you to have the faith to act on it instead of keep on asking him for him to give you something else. He's ready to help you right now where you're at. 1 Corinthians 2:9. says, "However, as it is written, no eye has seen and no ear has heard and no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him." Our God is working on something even though we might not see it. Back to my story in the barn. I'm laying there and I'm mad at my mom. And but I also, for the first time in a long time, I begin to feel God speaking to me. Begin to feel God talking to me. And it's not audible, but I can feel His presence for the first time in quite a while. And I felt like all of a sudden He reminded me of this verse in Proverbs, and I realized what my mom was actually referring to, because it's in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 12, and it says, "For the Lord corrects those He loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights." All of a sudden I realized, wait a second, maybe God does love me. Maybe He does have a plan for my life. And as I'm laying there, I realized, wait, I got to call somebody. I've got to talk to someone that will listen to me. And I still was too afraid to call and to talk to my dad. So I called the next best thing, my grandma, Miss B. And she's actually sitting right here on the front row. I love you so much. But I called her. I said, "Hey, Grandma, I'm a little hungry. You think you could make me an omelet? And I got some things I need to talk to you about." And she said, "Yeah, come on over." And I went over to her house. It was a Saturday morning, and I talked to her all day Saturday. I told her everything that was going on in my life. I didn't leave out one single detail. I didn't try to hide one thing. And she listened to me. And then that night I went into a room in her home and I prayed and I cried out to God for the first time in a long time. The next morning I went to church, and I actually came in through those doors right back there. And I walked into church and I sat on the front row for the first time in months. And then one of the coolest things about it was when I showed up and when I came in, I knew that people knew that I hadn't been living my life right and that I wasn't following God, and nobody cared. They were just excited to see me. And person after person coming up and greeting me and giving me a hug and just saying, "Hunter, it's good to see you." It felt so amazing. And I came in and I sat down in the front row, and worship was incredible. And my dad spoke that morning, and it was incredible. But that's not what I remember from that morning. What I remember is right after that, I got up out of my chair and I walked back out of those doors in the back. And when I walked out in the foyer, the first person that I locked eyes with was an elderly gentleman. And when I locked eyes with him, I felt like God whispered to me, "Hunter, if you listen to me, if you obey my commands, if you listen to the purpose that I have for you, then I promise you that you will be able to pastor this man and that I will be here for you for as long as you will let me." I said, "Okay, God, I'll do it." And then after looking at that man, I looked over and I looked at a young couple. And I felt like God told me the exact same thing. And I started looking all over the foyer and seeing people of all different ages, from all different kinds of places, and God telling me the same thing. "Hunter, if you would just listen to me, you will be able to pastor them. I promise you, I will always be with you." I said, "Okay, God, you got me. Whatever you want me to do, I'm yours." And for the next couple of years, I was restored in my relationship with God. I got a phone call one day from a pastor at one of our campuses. He said, "Hunter, do you want to pastor middle school students?" And I said, "I've never done it. I don't even know if I like them, but God promised me, so I'm going to do it." And I went and I pastored middle school students. And then my dad called me one day and said, "Hunter, do you want to pastor high school students in Conway?" And I said, "Dad, sure. I don't know if I can do it, but I know that my God promised me that if I were to follow Him, that I could pastor anybody. So let's do it." And I came and I started pastoring students here. And then one day, my dad pulled me into his office and he asked me something that I'll never forget. And it was such a moment where I realized how big our God was. He said, "Hunter, do you want to go pastor our new campus in Greenbrier?" And I lost it in his office. Because of this. That country road that I ran from that cop on, that barn that I slept in, was in Greenbrier, Arkansas. I passed that barn every single day on the way to church. I'm constantly reminded of where my life was when I was fighting for my own purpose and where my life is now that I've surrendered to God's. And I wouldn't for one second trade it. I love my life. I love my wife and I love my kid. But I'm so thankful for the promises that God has given me in my life and that He told me He would be there for me no matter what, and that He continues to do that for me. And I encourage you in your life to stand on His promises as well. Number 3, you need to know that God's powerful plan will help you overcome your excuses. Judges chapter 6, verse 15. It says, "But Lord," Gideon asked, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Think about this moment, okay? God, the creator of the universe, shows up and is having this conversation with Gideon where he's promising him all these things. He even just told him that he was a mighty warrior. God did. And all Gideon can talk about is his excuses. All he can say is, "But God, you don't understand. But God, you don't realize what I'm going through. But God, I'm the weakest. I can't do this." And God is trying to tell him, "No, you don't understand. I'm ready to use you right now. You got to be willing to put your excuses down." And if you don't get anything else from me this morning, I want you to get this. In life, you are either going to define your life by your facts or by your faith. It's your choice. And you can look at the facts that you have going on around you and all the hardships that you might have and what can keep you from doing what God is calling you to do. Or you can go on the faith that no matter what He calls you to do, if He is there with you, you can do it. And we have that choice. We get to define our life by our facts or by our faith, because our God is ready to use us right here, right now. And I know that there might even be some people out here who are saying, "But Hunter, I don't even know if God wants to use me. I've never even heard Him talk to me about what my purpose is." I don't think He even has one. And I promise you that is not the case. And this is how I'm going to prove it to you. I want everybody in here, if you came to church with somebody, to reach over and grab that person's wrist real quick and check and see if they have a pulse. Come on, everybody do it. If anybody gets a negative, let us know. We'll call 911. Everybody look at me real quick. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. If you are alive, God is ready to use you right now, no matter what's your excuse. God called Abraham when he was 100 years old and told him that He was about to start an entire nation through him. Think about the excuses that Abraham had. Like, he actually even started mentioning them. Like, "God, you don't understand. I'm 100. My wife's 90. We can't do this." And God said, "Quit telling me your excuses. I'm ready to use you right here, right now." Every time we spit an excuse at God, I can just see Him up in heaven looking back at us saying things like, "Do you not know who I am? I'm the God who put an interstate system through the Red Sea for my people. I'm the God who brought the dead back to life, who allowed the blind to see and the deaf to hear. Do you not think I'm big enough to get over whatever excuse you have?" Don't allow your excuses to define who you are and your facts to define who you are, but allow your faith to. Number 4, my last point, we're going to get out of here. You need to know that God's promise is bigger than your problem. Judges chapter 6, verse 16, "The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all of the Midianites together." God gives Gideon this promise of, "I will be here for you." God has a promise for every one of the problems that you might face in your life. In fact, right here in His Word, there are over 6,000 promises, which sounds about right, because that's about how many problems some of us go through on an average day. But there's enough. His Word is enough. His promises are enough. If we choose to stand on them, even when it feels like there isn't anything going our way, He will be enough, always and forever. Just over a year ago, Katie and I, our life was going so good. We loved it. I was a youth pastor. I love being a youth pastor. It's like a party all the time. It was great. I loved it. And then all of a sudden, like in December, somebody calls Katie or texts Katie and says, "Hey, do you and Hunter want to go on a trip to Israel?" And Katie responded to her and said, "Well, yeah, we would like to go, but those things are expensive." And the lady said, no, you don't understand. We're going to pay for you to go. Do you want to go? Yes, we want to go. When's the next flight? Okay, we were so excited about it. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to Israel. This was last January. And then, like right at the beginning of January, Katie calls me in the room and says, Hunter, we're pregnant. So now we're both like, God, how amazing are you? Your promises are being fulfilled. This seems, nothing could be going better. Thank you so much. We call Katie's parents over to the house and my parents over to the house, and we tell them that they're going to be grandparents. Everybody's excited. The next day we get on a flight and we're going to the promised land. We're going to Israel. And in the middle of our flight, everything changed. Because while we were up 30,000 feet, without getting into too many details, my wife had a miscarriage. And we're up, all of a sudden realizing all of the facts that are going on around us. Like our eyes just open. And we realize we are about to be thousands and thousands of miles away from our entire family and everybody we know. We were on a trip with 60 people, all of them over the age of 50, that we had never met before in our life. We were youth pastors. We had no idea what we were doing. And we landed in Israel and we called the doctor, and the doctor said that everything was going to be okay and then we could stay in Israel. But we were hurting and my wife was hurting and I didn't know how to help her. Went to the hotel that night and we fell asleep, and we're just almost zombie-like. Like we just had no joy in our life and no joy in our eyes. And the next morning I woke up and I walked out on the balcony of our hotel, which was actually right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And the sun came up. Felt like God asked me, he said, Hunter, are you going to stand on your facts? Or are you going to stand on my promises to you? Are you going to remember that I told you that if you listen to me, if you allow me to guide your life, I will be here for you? Or are you going to allow these facts to ruin your trip? Because I promised you that you can pastor people of all ages. Are you ready to do this? And I walked back in the hotel and I told Katie, and we walked out of that room and we decided we were going to pastor people. And we didn't put a fake smile on our face. We just decided to find joy wherever we could. And we started pastoring those people. We started loving on them. We were there in Israel for 14 days, loving on these people. And by the time we were coming back, they were trying to get us to come back to their church and be their pastors. That was awkward because their pastor was on the trip, okay? It was weird. We chose to stand on his promise. On the flight home, Katie leaned over to me and said, Hunter, we could do this. We could pastor people of any age. I said, babe, I think you're right. We didn't know what we were going to do with that information. We just said, okay. Not long after that is when my dad pulled me in his office and asked me to be the pastor in Greenbrier. I know that because we chose to stand on our promise from God, and because we chose in that moment not to identify our life by our facts and why we could have been hurting, but instead identify with what God promised us to do, He was able to teach us something. He was able to prepare us for something that we never could have seen coming. I love being a youth pastor, but I love pastoring in Greenbrier. God knew that was inside of me, and He was working on something before I ever even could realize it. He was setting it up. And I don't for one second think that God caused our miscarriage, but I think that our God is big enough to turn anything into good if we allow Him to. And our God, He was there for Katie and I. And not 12 hours after I told my dad that I would be the pastor in Greenbrier, Katie pulled me back into our room and said, Hunter, we're pregnant. When we got back from Israel, the doctor said that we wouldn't be able to get pregnant for about 6 more months. If we were lucky, 3 months. We started doing the math and we found out that we actually got pregnant while we were in Israel. It's God's promise. That moment when we could have identified with our facts, we chose to identify with our faith of how big our God was. And He showed us just how big He really is. And He wants to do the same thing to you in your life. If you would, please bow your heads.